Hello, Rabbit Hole. So, today is going to be a little bit more of an exploration of the psyche as opposed to that of like a traditional research exploration. Because recently I have been working on a project in which I'm trying to combine my photos and my poetry, which brought about this idea that I feel like in the modern age, especially as somebody who grew up sort of on social media, like constantly flood with images, I really do feel like photo almost serves as this sort of postmodern poem, which in the title I'm just going to call it postmodern because I feel like if you see too many posts, it just doesn't make sense. Maybe hypermodern, like I feel like that is a better description of the current age because I do throw around postmodern like everywhere, but I feel like that was kind of specific to the era, and nowadays we had a lot more culturally shifting events that I feel like have put us in a hyper modern era. It's like related to that postmodern, but it's like what they were foreseeing as the late stage of what was starting then is what we're currently living in. Anyways, let me not get into that territory because this is more so focused on like images and writing and sort of my process for discovering that within myself and how I feel like I communicate through photos and how I feel like images communicate through my writing, or more so maybe inform the writing. Because I often feel like I am thinking in images. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's this sort of indescribable way of putting it, and that is like how I translate it into photos. And of course, there is context for it. A lot of the images that I make do come from like flashbacks from trauma and all of that, but I have found that it's super like, I want to use the right words because freeing is just such a like broad word, but it's super liberating to be able to take these images that are stuck in my mind, and even if they're represented symbolically rather than like literally, to put that into a documented form so that way I feel like I can release it in a way, because I know that I will always have that as a representation of what happened, so maybe my mind doesn't have to keep reminding me, because often I feel like the purpose of these flashbacks isn't just to torture us, it's sort of to remind ourselves that like it's a survival instinct of avoiding that situation, right? And it's constantly bringing it back up, maybe as like a warning sign, because a lot of times these flashbacks are brought about like smells and times of year and sort of more feelings and sensory things, which I feel like I try to capture in my images a lot. So I'm getting really off track, but that is kind of the point of the rabbit hole, is that it's going to be scattered and we're just gonna dive in and see where it takes us. We're gonna grow, we're gonna shrink, we're going to bite the cake. I love Alice in Wonderland. I need to watch it. Because really I just wanted to inspect sort of why I started writing and why I started making images, because in trying to combine these separate mediums, it has been more fluid than I thought, and that almost is even challenging in a way, because the images in the poems both come from subconscious sources, and a lot of these narratives, sometimes I have them ahead of time, and those are often my favorite shoots. Like I love when I have a story in my mind, like sort of a fiction idea that I want to bring to life, but a lot of the times it is more so just like a subconscious exploration in which I sort of derive a narrative from it in post. And it's this really interesting process because I sort of understand the purpose of why I was taking those images only after they've been taken. And that's why I feel so bad. If you're watching this, and I probably owe you photos if you know me, like I really probably do, that I've probably never sent to you. And I feel bad, but it's because a lot of times I feel like these images, I haven't fully dug out what their meaning is in my narrative of the grander story, right? Because also for a long time, it felt selfish in a way to make this very like memoiric work that sort of came from experience, because it was like, who am I to sort of think that my story is important? But a lot of times I think that I like looking at myself as more of a symbol. And like, that can be complicated, you know, it comes with its own challenges, but I enjoy, even in dyeing my hair blonde, like that felt symbolic in becoming this sort of archetype, like the crazy blonde, the dumb blonde, like it's sort of owning those things and wearing it as a label and just putting it all out on display. Like that is what Sadistic Angel as a whole really means to me, is it was this sort of warning label in which I wanted to show the worst parts of myself, even if that was people's perceptions of me, because a lot of the times I feel like I'm misperceived and misunderstood, and that results in these really contrasting perceptions of me where it's like you either love or you hate me. And so it's that extreme, that sadistic, that angel, and I wanted to play into that contradictory balance and sort of just, put the worst parts of me up on display so that those like mushier, softer sides of me, that if you can accept the worst parts, you get access to. Whereas I feel like most people view it as the opposite. At least that's what I feel like I'm taught to do in a culture, and that's what I'm trying to like sort of rebel against. But it is like this complicated balance of putting the self as a symbol, because a lot of times with a symbol, you really want to deconstruct that symbol. You really want to kind of desecrate it and like tear it apart to understand it. So when you're doing that to yourself, it can be a little bit overwhelming at times, but also really inspiring, because change has always been the most, like, I want to say levitating feeling, because it brings me the most levity I feel within accepting a lot of these darker parts of myself and my past. Because change and being able to change, being willing to change, being accepting of change feels like the ultimate like anti-revenge. You know what I mean? Like it almost feels like a way to reclaim authority and authorship over your life. You know what I mean? Because I've always felt like, oh, well, I can just change myself. And that feels like sort of redirecting the plot, rewriting the character, like even just maybe embodying a new character, right? Like I think of Biography of X, that's one of my favorite books, and how the main character in that book, like, has a new identity basically with every person she meets. And don't we all? Like every single person we interact with, we will have a different state of being with, and they will perceive us differently than we act, differently than we feel, different than our intent is, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. So like I feel like change is so scary, and I say this all, but then I still do get scared of change. Like goodbyes specifically, I am the worst at goodbyes. I dread goodbyes. They make me depressed, like seriously. But still, I need to remind myself sometimes that change is literally the only constant. That is such basic advice, but it applies to literally everything in life. That's, I guess, what maybe I make the images for then, and the writing. Like, because the writing definitely feels like it's always been a way to change how I'm feeling, to sort of transmute an emotion in that same way where it's like, if I can get it out of my brain, I can get it somewhere else, and then I don't have to think about it. And honestly, a lot of that does result in me like really rarely ever reading back on any of my writing. I almost always just lock it away in the journal and just keep writing. And it's good in a way because I'm constantly producing, but then at the same time, there's just so much that I now have to go through, and it's very interesting. And a lot of times I wish that I was reading it more when I read back, because I'm like, oh my God, like I would have realized this if I was reading it back, but I'm sort of like, that's the dump for it. So I don't necessarily want to go back into the dumps, but a lot of times there's the hidden treasure in the dump. You know what I mean? So I need to take more time with that and figure that out, and also realize that like it can be sort of fixed up. You know, I can do a little fixer-upper on the junk of the past and all of that. Because in like an inverse way, the photos, I feel like, are a method to, like I said, sometimes delve into those like fiction narratives, but a lot of the times I feel like it's to express things that really can't be said in words. And that ties back to the whole idea of even like you have to see it to believe it. Like sort of this idea of photos as evidence to the writing in a way, and photos as a way to see what's being said in more abstract terms or maybe more hard to understand terms. Because I feel like when paired together, you get the full picture, and not just the full picture, but also sort of clues to understanding. Because I don't necessarily love explaining, but I do enjoy using the images and the words to sort of incite discourse within the person who's interacting with the work, right? And within myself too, and to sort of inspect these own conflicting pieces of discourse I have sort of debating in my mind, and to visualize maybe how ironic, that's not the word, because I feel like I've been focused so much on irony lately, and it's not even that, but showing just how heightened, how much of a spectacle that these discourses become when we take them literally and when we take them to heart and when they become a part of our identity. Because I feel like being on social media and having it been such a core part of the development of my identity makes it so that I am just constantly like finding the like myself in the discourse, defining ourselves through the discourse, because that is so much of where these like scenes and connections are starting, and I feel like formed. And it is a great way to connect, like I even just in silly ways where it doesn't necessarily have to be like super serious political discourse, but even just like discourse within people that are interested in the same things as you, and inspecting how we look at them in today's world and through a modern lens and all of that. It's just really starting conversations, because that is what I really aim to do. And even if it's just in yourself, because like I said, a lot of these I feel like are conversations I'm having within myself with the images and the text, and sort of finding a way to weave them together has been more difficult than I thought, because while they come from the same place, there is a certain level to these images having things that can't really be expressed in words. And I feel like I'm trying to like pair it specifically with words, or even put words to it, when it's like sometimes I feel like that almost takes away from it in a way. And it's obvious that it is within the same world, right? Within the same mindscape, I like to think of it as, but it isn't necessarily something that can be defined. And that feels like what I was saying and thinking of images as like memories. And I feel like a lot of us do that in just taking photos, because honestly, like I have so many photos that I've taken that I love, but I took this past year to really like try to develop a more healthy relationship with Instagram. But in a way I got sad, because I feel like I had so many memories that I recorded through photos just naturally that I wanted to share. But it's like this idea of timeliness, and like, do I share these images from months or years ago, and how do you share those with them still being relevant now? And do I even need to share those? Like, why am I even questioning needing to share those when I have those memories in my camera roll? But sometimes I do, in a weird way, like not trust these platforms more than I trust like iCloud or my hard drives or whatever. But I like the idea of putting the work on as many platforms as possible, because there is a lot of content I have posted to my Instagram that, like, when my phone got stolen, the only way that content existed was there, and I was so glad I like posted it, spam my story, because my phone got stolen that day. And I had a couple of things from that day still that didn't sync to iCloud or whatever. And other things that just get lost along the way. And it's nice to have that record of it and for it to exist there, because I don't necessarily have it. And I feel like I have so many images, because that's a controversial part of my practice also and that's kind of why I love film and I love Polaroid and I love it all. I really, really do, because like there just is something different to the results. It just creates these beautiful, beautiful results that you just cannot replicate digitally, no matter how hard you try. But like, I do favor digital because I love to take just like as many images as possible. And I do enjoy having shot lists, but like in between the shot lists and after I get those shots, I like to just play, because you never know what images those are going to get. And I like having all of the images to choose from, but that means that I have an insane archive, like an insane level of images, which almost makes each image lose its value. They get lost in the archive, they get forgotten about, which I kind of also enjoy as like this part of the process of like digging out clues and like putting the pieces together, and sort of that archiving process being a part of informing the work as a whole, right? And so it's all just this big mindful mess, and that necessarily isn't the all of the images that I'm creating. You know what I mean? Like those are just like my favorite images that I feel are the most aligned with me. But also a lot of my favorite images are just dumb luck. Because I like a lot of times, even with film, like some of my favorite parts of the film images I take is when it fucks up and when I fuck up with the settings, and it creates this interesting effect. And same with digital too. Like I have really started to embrace the fuck ups. It's just interesting to study like which fuck ups resonate and which ones that you think will and that won't, and that you don't think do but that other people think do. Like that's an interesting radar to build, but not impossible. And again, just the fun of the process. And I'm trying to really sort of enjoy the post process of it all as being more creative, because I dread it, because I have had awful hard drive failures that make me so scared to even open my hard drive, and so resistant to like organizing things because I'm scared they're just gonna disappear on me. But a part of me is like, oh, I need to like, of course I'm better. The backup trauma has, you know, given me better ways and multiple sources and all of that. But I feel like I need to look at the archiving process as being more creative than it is, because it's sort of putting the pieces to these stories that aren't necessarily finished, right? And knowing that I can add words, I can take away words, and that they don't necessarily have to fully explain each other to create this narrative, because it doesn't have to be necessarily a finished narrative in my mind, because I also think of that way in how images change in the way we perceive them, and their meaning changes over time based in both my connection with the subjects of the images, as well as like the symbolic connections of the cultural discourse to those symbols or to those like subjects. But yeah, it's very interesting to think about this, and I like having more of a dialogue because it feels more like a dialogue in my head, and it's hard to write it out because I feel like I have so much to say, and I still could continue on, and I probably will as the process evolves, because like I said, I'm really interested in post and focusing on how what I do with the images can affect the story even more and build it out even more, right? So who's to know? Who's to know how this process will evolve? It's just how it started, I guess. But anyways, thank you for coming down the rabbit hole with me. Hopefully I will see you again soon.